Welcome back to our series on 1st Enoch. Today we're going to take up 1st Enoch, chapter 7, verse 1. Now, just as a quick reminder to where we left off, if you haven't listened to the prior video, the leaders of the Watchers, some 20 leaders, high-level angels, got together, conspired, planned, plotted, and bound themselves together with an oath that they would go down and do that which was forbidden by God. And they would go and they would follow their own will instead of God's will. And Enoch 7, verse 1. These and all the others with them took for themselves wives from among them, such as they chose. They began to go into them and to defile themselves through them, and to teach them sorcery and charms, and to reveal to them the cutting of roots and plants. Now, this is a very interesting place. I mean, the entire book of 1st Enoch is very interesting. But what you see here is Enoch is starting to now go considerably beyond what Genesis 6 is telling us. Genesis 6 just mentions that the sons of God married the daughters of men, and the sons of God, that is to say, the angels, the Watchers, went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. So all that Genesis 6 tells you is that the sons of God, these are not regular people, these are supernatural beings, senior angels called the Watchers. They decided to go down to the earth and to indulge their own will and their own desires. They took wives from among the women of earth, such as they chose, and they began to go into them, which is having sexual relations like husbands and wives. Now, somebody might think, well, wait a minute, that can't happen, because Jesus said that in heaven, the angels don't marry and they're not given in marriage. These are angels, right? So they can't do that. Well, the context again is of resurrection. And Jesus does not say that no angel of any sort can ever have any sort of marrying, giving in marriage, or any activities thereof. All that he's saying is that in heaven, in the afterlife, if you will, there is no marrying by angels, by people even. What you've got is a different realm in the afterlife. But right here, you have angels going to women and living with them as husband and wife, including having families. Now, how could this be? They're angels. Well, if you remember, you will remember that in Genesis, as well as other places in the Old Testament, that angels appear to people once in a while, and unless the angelic being gives the person involved some kind of tip-off that they're more than an ordinary person, in general, angels are not perceived by people to be anything exceptional. They look like ordinary men. And in this case, you've got the Watchers coming down and taking on human form. We know that they're able to do this. The two guests that came to Abraham and Sarah, they sat, they ate. Angels can do all these things when they wish to. When they are ready to, they can assume human form and look for all the world like an ordinary person. So the angels are coming. They're choosing human women, they're living with them as husband and wife, and they're having children. Now, it says here, they began to go into them and to defile themselves through them. Well, what's the deal with that? Well, in a modern Western culture, we would have trouble figuring out why husband and wife might not be a good idea. Why is this defiling being mentioned? Well, you've got to remember the setting that the original writing was done in. It was done under the Torah. And in Torah, most people are aware that Leviticus has quite a few rules, do's and don'ts, clean and unclean, regulations, stipulations, and so forth that are very detailed, very numerous. And for ordinary husbands and wives, there are 3 things that will make the people involved become unclean for a certain period of time or until certain prayers or rituals are done. Those 3 things are marital sexual relations, menstruation, and childbirth. You can go look it up, and in each of those cases, the essence is not, oh, well, these things are sinful, because they're not. They're good. But that they impact a person's readiness to be in the holy place under the worldview and under the law that was in place at that time. Enoch was written at a period of time where everybody understood that there were regulations having to do with holiness, with the temple, with the tabernacle, wherever you were. So the angels come down. These are senior angels. They're operating in a very, very privileged, very, very small number of them, I'm sure, in heaven. And they said, nope, we're done with that. That was their major sin. Then they come down to earth and they're marrying human women and having families. That is another problem for God. Now, the reason that it's mentioned as defiling is that this is Torah. It's a Torah type outlook, and this is why you've got defiling themselves being mentioned. It's not that marital relations or having children or a woman having her period are sinful and evil. No, they're not. But in the days when these documents were being written, there was a purity, holiness in all of these other codes and understandings, and everybody knew how it worked. Everybody went along and everybody followed the rules if they were faithful to God. So this is the background of that. And it says, they also began to teach them sorcery and charms and to reveal to them the cutting of roots and plants. Now, this is a very unusual thing. This is not mentioned in Genesis, but they're teaching their wives and their families, and pretty soon this knowledge is disseminating throughout the world. They're teaching forbidden knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge that is reserved for heaven. You may remember Paul talking about going into the third heaven and seeing things it's not lawful to mention on the earth. Paul said there are things up there that God has forbidden to be talked about on the earth. This was the situation in Enoch, where you have forbidden knowledge being brought to earth. And we look at it and we see that it was sorcery and charms. In later parts of Enoch, we're going to go into this in more detail, but we can have magic, sorcery, divination. This included astrology, the signs of the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets. These are the kind of things that the Watchers were bringing to earth. How to make sorcery, witchcraft, astrology, and all the rest. The other thing that's mentioned is to revealing to them the cutting of roots and plants. Now, that may not sound like anything much. Does it might sound like you're making a stew or a soup? You got to cut, you take the plants and you cut them up and you put them in the pot. No, that's not what's being looked at here. What you're looking at here is a situation where certain specific roots and plants are being gathered and prepared in order to be used for either medicine or sorcery. Now, there's a word for this. It's pharmakeia, which some of you have heard of. Pharmakeia, pharmakeia. We have video and we have material on our website that talks about this. Pharmakeia in the Bible is generally translated witchcraft or sorcery. Words to that effect. whether it's the Septuagint translation of the Old Testament or the New Testament. So what you're looking at is the cutting of roots in plants. When you look at what you might call old societies where you don't have modern outlooks, modern practices, you could call it traditional, animistic, primitive societies, or others like that, where you have plants, herbs, things like that being gathered and used with incantations and sorcery. This is the essence of pharmakia. And this is one of the things that is being discussed in this point here. Not discussed, but hinted at. And I'll spell that again in case you want to look it up. Pharmakeia, pharmakia. We've talked about it in the context of deliverance several times. It's a very important concept, and it is the Greek word that is variations on that word pharmakia are used several times in the New Testament and a couple of 3 times in the Old Testament. So the Watchers began to teach them things which were forbidden for them to teach. They were forbidden for people to learn. And this is what goes on. We're going to get into this more deeply as we get into chapters 8 and following of the Book of the Watchers, which is the first section of 1 Enoch, which we're at. So we're going to keep going next time. Because this material is going to be brand new to many people, I'm going very slow and I'm explaining things. I mean, we only did 1 verse today. The first video we did, I did 5 verses. Every part of the book of Enoch is different. It's unique, it's fascinating, and it requires careful study because many of the things that are discussed in Enoch are going to be either never mentioned in the Bible and largely unfamiliar to people who are watching these videos. Nancy and I were not familiar with any of this a year or 2 ago. We've been studying these things for a while, but we still are learning all the time. And what we're learning, we're passing on to you. So in the name of Jesus, we bless you. We look forward to having you along as we continue next time in the book of Enoch, and God bless you.